Alright, what's going on, everybody? This is Wraith Designz, and today I figured I'd upload a more updated version of my light map videos. I kind of have a few of them, but I'm going to try to put everything into one video and also add a few more pointers that I'm pretty sure a lot of people aren't aware of that will pretty much guarantee to fix all of your light map issues for the most part. So as you can see here, this is the room that I put together really quickly. Some of the meshes I designed in 3ds Max. And as you can see, for the most part, um, everything is totally fine. There's no bleeding anywhere that there shouldn't be. Ambient occlusion is on. Shadows are being, baked where they're supposed to be. Lighting is where it's supposed to be. I did a lower resolution shadow map just because if I did a little higher, I was having issues recording, so you can get these a lot sharper. You just have to mess around with light mask settings. I'm not going to really get into that too much in this video, but I'll get into it a little bit. Another thing I turned off was light map compression, which is something that is actually selected by default. Now, like I said, I'll get into that a little later. I just wanted to show you what I got here. Now, everything in here is my asset except the ground and this sphere. That's why I put different textures on there, as well as kind of showing you contrast. So you're probably wondering, well, how the heck did you get you know, your light maps to work properly and everything looks pretty good? Well, easy. Lightmap templates. There's something that I use every time I design a model and I want to, light map it so that it works properly in the game engine. And you really can't get near perfect shadows and lighting without them. You just can't, because the whole principle is, these shadows are, they're textures just like anything else in here, and textures and images use pixels. So the way that light maps or the swarm agent works is that it's using your light map UV to detect where it will bake these on anything in your project or level map, whatever. And if they're not set up right, you're going to get bleeding. And one of the major ways that that happens is that edges of UVs are not snapped to pixels properly, or they're going through the middle of pixels, or they're going through too many pixels. And a shadow burning onto things, every pixel is used when it does this that it needs. It doesn't use half pixels or anything like that. So when you have edges and stuff through the middle of pixels, you're going to get a lot more bleeding issues. So that's how I ended up getting this to look pretty good. Now, obviously, you can see a little issue here, um, and this is just because the way that I've set up the UVs. They aren't perfect. I did it pretty quickly, but they work for the most part, and you want to fine tune them the best you can. But also, this can be solved with certain lighting situations as well, or just creating an entire one piece. Now, this is two pieces, so in a modular fashion, that's a little bit harder to kind of get perfect shadows because it will detect the sides, and depending on the material you use and lighting and your light mask settings, this can happen even if you have mapped out all your UVs properly. So don't be discouraged. That's just something that happens. Even with everything set up perfectly, you're never going to get perfect light maps, but you will get very close. I've also put in here light mask portals in the openings. That just helps filling up the room with more light. I've also, let me minimize this real quick. I've also turned the environmental color, which is default black, to white, so there's a little bit more brightness instead of it being darker. When you put it to black, you're going to see a lot more dark areas, so depending on what your level is going to be, that's another thing to look out. Um, I'm also using some settings that I saw somebody from Epic Games use on an Unreal Engine 4 stream about lighting and light mask. So I'm kind of messing around with those to work with. But you would probably want to amp these way up if you're doing, ArcViz maps where you really want everything to be very high quality lighting and shadows. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to do everything production quality just testing it out. You want to test it out in preview and then finalize it with production quality. So when you're satisfied with what you see in preview, you're really going to be satisfied in the final product. So that's taken care of there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my 3D modeling program here. I gotta kind of have to reload it quick. I was messing around with this real quick here. So anyway, one thing I want to kind of point out here. Let me maximize this. So I optimize each piece to the best of my ability, as well as to what I believe will work best for the light mapping. Now, one piece I did forget was this. I've pretty much already light mapped all of these and brought them into Unreal. So when I look at these right now, you may see some UVs out of place, stuff like that. That's because, I didn't save it. So that's my B. Yeah, let me actually collapse that first. I'm going to take these polygons and delete them. This also goes hand in hand with optimization, so don't worry. This is another reason why they have you do this, because light mapping can be a pain in the butt. So, you see here that I got a small little piece, not really intricate. It's very, very simple. Now, as you can see, they're kind of spaced out a little bit more than I want them to, but I'm going to fix that in a second. Now, some of these, you're not going to be able to fill up the whole space. And even if you try to, you don't want to do that for a good reason. And I know a lot of people say that this doesn't matter what these sizes are in the light map, or this should be actually map channel 2. So we're just going to move that real quick. Always make sure that when you're making your light maps, you have it on channel 2. You don't want it on 1. Also, like I just did that, okay, for instance, let me go back. I'll just move it. Now, let's say you accidentally did it on 1 and you want to move it to number 2. You don't want to do abandon, because if you do that, you're just going to start off from scratch and have to do it again. If you move it, it'll move it from map channel 1 to 2. So these do matter depending on what you're doing. So if someone says this doesn't matter, that's not true. It does matter. You want to make sure that you don't erase a UV layout that you just set, and it's always good to save them after you've made them, save them and label them just in case that happens, so that you can just reload them in on each channel. That's a good practice. So again, I'll just move it. And so this is the important part that I'm going to get into about Lightmap templates. A lot of people may have not heard of this. Some people probably think it's not good to use these, which I got to disagree with those folks, because if you really want crisp shadows and good shadows all over your level using your light maps, this is the preferred way to do it. So as you can see, default background, it's a checker pattern. I've got this. So what I'm going to do first, down here, at least on 3ds Max, you'll see grid snap option. It's not even toggled, but you want to hold it and go down to pixel snap. Okay, this is important. And up here, I'm going to go to pick texture and go to bitmap. Now I already have one, 1024 by 1024. I'm going to load that in, and there's a reason why I do these two first. Okay, now as you can see, the background, each one of these squares here is a pixel. It's the exact size of a pixel. So when I design these, I aimed for a certain resolution, and then I made the checker board according. So anyway, these ones aren't the ones I made. These are actually ones that I got from somebody on YouTube named Warren Marshall. However, I did take his lower resolution ones and just made higher resolution versions, because I wanted them bigger for architectural visualization. And I need higher resolution. So anyway, he's the one that I learned Lightmap templates from. So if you want to look him up, Warren Marshall, WarrenMarshell, or ALL. Anyway, you'll notice him right off the bat. He does a lot of stuff in Modo and things like that. He's pretty good. But he's the one that I learned this from. So anyway, this is what I use to properly line my UVs, so I don't get any bleeding in issues or areas where I shouldn't. So now that I have these selected, what I'm going to do real quick, and I wouldn't normally advise this, I would advise you doing it by hand, but for what I'm trying to pull off here, this actually works. So we'll do that. I'll put this to 1, try to get as close as possible. And so, as you can see, when I did that, it didn't automatically snap it. So don't worry about that. What you need to do is you need to move it so that it will detect the pixel and snap it to it. So that's what I'm about to do right now. Bam. See? Done. It's that simple. You just, once you did that, and because you had them both selected, what's going to happen is that your UV islands are going to adjust to snap to the pixels properly, including the vertices. So as you can see, even though this is a straight edge, even if it wasn't completely straight, the majority of it will snap. All the straight edges will snap to the best of their ability. You may have to do a little bit of tinkering with certain UV faces and stuff like that, but we always have to do that at some point. Another thing is, again, for the padding, I use two pixel padding on the outside and 4 in between islands. Sometimes you may have to increase that, so it's okay to do like 4 on the outside, 8 in between, and so forth. But you want to make sure this is going to be smaller than this padding in between the islands, okay? And that's to prevent bleeding from like shadows burning from here or baking from here, then going on to another face that it shouldn't, okay? That's just one thing to keep in mind. So I'm going to bring that up here, do this real quick. Oh yeah, I want to do 4. Okay, so now these also, again, you want to make sure they're utilizing as much space in the UV grid as possible. They're not always going to fill up the whole thing, so don't think you have to aim to fill everything up. You don't always have to do that. You just need to make sure they utilize as much space as possible, but at the same time, you want to keep them true to the size that they are on your model. And trust me on this, because if you don't do that, and I know a lot of people say it doesn't matter, it does. If you don't do it, what's going to happen is the shadow resolution here might be a lot different as it is here. So let's say you had something next to this and it burnt into your level, or baked. I just say burnt. But the shadow resolution here might be a lot finer and smaller than it is over here, and all of a sudden you see it more pixelated. Okay, and that's what will happen. And sometimes between edges and the insides here, like the corners, you'll see unevenness. Now I have that kind of going on in my level as it is, but I'm just trying to do this quickly to show everybody what I'm talking about. So it's good to have kind of errors in there as well to show you. So let me go here, and so what's going to happen is I'm going to bring these down. Alright, I just took those vertices, it didn't move anything else, brought those down. Now those are fit and snap, and got the 4 in between. Okay, and this is exactly how I have it laid out in Unreal Engine 4 already, so I've already done this. So that's that's as good as you're going to get with just these two for this one piece. Okay, so that's it, that's done. Now that's a simple piece. Now if we go here, all right, get into, now you got to do this every time, which kind of sucks, but once you pick it and you keep it to that folder, that's all you got to do. Turn that on. Okay, and so again, same thing. Bring it down, snap it, and once I move it once, all the other islands and edges will snap to the best of their ability into the pixels. As you can see, the small ones do it. Okay, things like that. So they're all pretty much done. Now another thing is this is as you can see over here, these little square pieces are these. All right, and when I did flatten mapping, it did exactly what I needed it to do, which you would have to do by hand anyway, is that it would take certain edges, okay, sharp edges, and they would make each one of them its own island. All right, and that's what you need to do. If you have these and you make them all one island and flatten them out, it's not going to look right. So some of you may run into that problem and wonder, well, how come it's not working? Every sharp edge, every edge that will be in a different direction in the 3D world, you want to make sure that those islands are separate. Like for instance, if I just do this, okay, that's one island automatically. Bam, done. So again, now next island, what would I do? Just click this one, done. Okay, another one, done. All right, that's what you got to keep in mind, because you think about it in the real world. I know a lot of people look at the unfold box reference, but sometimes that doesn't cover everything, and sometimes it's hard to understand what they mean for all different assets. But what they're just trying to say is that you got one face here, here, and underneath. That unfolding works, but you still have to separate these pieces. So that's what I mean. Sometimes that reference is good, but then again, if you think about a cardboard box, it's all one big piece that you're unfolding. You don't always want to do that. You want to make sure that you cut pieces off. So really what you're probably trying to do with that method is unfold the box and then cut the squares and separate them. Okay, and that's one thing they don't always teach you and add into a tutorial. So that's something that is necessary. Otherwise, you're going to get bleeding from this side to here and vice versa. Even if you have them spaced, it's still going to have issues. So make sure you do that. Again, you want to pack these as tight as possible, but you also want to utilize as much space as possible without warping these. If you warp your UVs too much, like I said, you're going to get different resolutions of shadow. It may not matter. Maybe you can get away with it. It's all a matter of what you're aiming for, preference, balancing act between optimization and memory and look. So just keep that in mind. But that's basically what I do to snap my UVs to the grid and to the pixels. Now, another method I know that works, I wouldn't advise it, I would just say make a template. But some programs this will work for, others it won't. Like 3ds Max, it doesn't always work, and there's a reason for it. So you saw here how it has grid snap. Now, I know some of my other videos I may have mentioned this. Now, this is what I didn't know back then. Grid snap, what will happen is you will be snapping each piece to the grid. Now, if you make the grid the size of the pixels, you're all set. You don't need a template. You just need to snap it to the grid, which is fine. But my experience is that this won't go that small. Not as small as these pixels are. It will round itself out to a certain numerical value, which will never get past that. So I won't be able to rely on that grid to work properly with the shadow map resolution I'm looking for, and they have to be powers of 2. Okay, so right now you can see this is the original grid. I just turned that on, grid size and the show grid here. So this is the default. When you are trying to find the proper grid size for your light map, and let's say you're going for what I'm going for here is 1024 by 1024, you would divide 1 by 1024. Same thing with any other resolution. Let's say you're aiming for 512, you would divide 1 by 512, and whatever you get for that, you would input that into the grid size. Same thing would work with Maya, Blender, and all these other programs. I'm fluent with 3ds Max, just my preferred program. So if I remember correctly, when I did the calculation, it was, and then a bunch of other numbers. Now, the only reason I'm only doing this right now is because what I'm about to show you is what happened when I did that too. When I put all the numbers in, the same thing happened as I'm doing right now here. So when I press enter, oh, whoops, my bad. Okay, so there you go. Sometimes it does that. It got smaller, but it did not get small enough to line up to these properly, and they have to line up. Okay, this is the whole point. And so it rounded itself out. And maybe there's something else I'm not realizing on here where I can fix that in this program. I'm sure there is, but I haven't been able to figure it out. So I just rely on the template. So if you can fix that and get it to work, just remember the best way to set up the grid to work with your UVs to snap properly without the template, just divide 1 by whatever resolution you're aiming for. Okay, and that doesn't mean, divide 1 by 512 by 512. Don't do that. Just divide 1 by 512 if that's what you're aiming for, 1024, 2048, whatever. And you should be fine. But we don't really need that right now. Okay, I go by pixel snapping, so that's the best method to work with. So we'll just close that for now. And as you can see, this is a modular set. All right, another thing I'm going to get out of the way real quick now is another method to kind of help balance your shadow map resolution across all your pieces. Okay, and this is kind of what I mean about balancing act, sacrificing versus optimization and look. Is that you have to keep in mind that when you go into Unreal Engine 4, let me do that quick actually, you will see certain things like this. Okay, in the corners. You see how sometimes the shadows, it goes over here, then it starts here instead. Now that could be because of the size of the UVs and the light map. If you adjust it just right to all of them be pretty even, I think that may fix this. If it doesn't, then that's just the way it is. I don't know if there's an actual way to totally fix every part here. But I also know that a way to detect or to see how your light maps and shadows are going to work on your level is to go under optimization view modes, light map density. And what this does is it shows you the density of your light maps based on resolution, but also based on the size of your UV faces. So even though you have everything 1024 by 1024, does not mean that every face on every model is going to be using that and optimizing it properly. Okay, so you may have to adjust in the engine, which is why they have the option for any asset, and I'll show you in a second how to change the light map resolution. Now, what these colors really mean is that this would be optimal. This is what you would probably want to aim for optimization as well as coverage. This is good. Green is good. Now, it doesn't mean red is bad, it just means that you're overkilling. It will still work, but it's really kind of overkilling. And again, this may be a memory issue, optimization issue, or it's just preference. It's just giving you an idea, okay? So you see how fine these pixels are, how the grid is on this? It's kind of hard to see. The whole reason it's like that is because I'm using a really large light map, and it's been utilized across it good with the Lightmap template, but it's a lot of it. Okay, so I could probably bog this down to 512 by 512, and it will change the color a little bit. I could probably even drop it to 256. The problem with that is there's no guarantee that your UVs will snap properly still with lower resolutions or higher. You got to be careful. I think you can go up or down one level and be okay. If you go past that, it's going to start having issues. So even though these are two different colors, they're both 1024 by 1024. Now this is Epic's model, but I changed the light map resolution on it. And the thing is this, I did not mess with their UV map, obviously, because I didn't create it. Now if I make the same thing and did it in 3ds Max and brought it in, it would be different, okay? But I just adjusted the light map resolution on their already created asset. That's all I did. And so it said, okay, this is a good coverage, right? And it was a different color before, so I got it to go green by upping it. Now, again, these look smaller, but that's because I'm utilizing more space for these walls within the Lightmap template, and I've used a resolution that Unreal is saying I don't really need to use. However, I'm aiming for more crisp shadows outside of optimization. So if you're making a huge level, this is what this entire view is mainly for, so you can optimize things. I know that there's another menu somewhere in Unreal that will show you each asset that you have in your level, the resolution, and how much memory it uses up. So there is an option to do that, but right now this is what I go by quickly because I don't really make huge scenes. I usually do architectural stuff. And yeah, so this is another way to view that. If you want to balance this out, again, let me go back to Lightmap tutorial folder, and well, for instance, let's just do this one. Okay, so here you got the asset. Now when you bring these in, when you import them, by default down here the light map resolution in the general settings is always going to be 64. At least that's what I've noticed. So if you made a asset that's aiming to get a shadow map of 1024 by 1024, because that's what your light map resolution is, or your light map UVs will be 1024 by 1024, you want to make sure this matches. Okay, if you don't, it's not going to look right. And so that's sometimes why they tell you to change this in some of your assets to fix issues. But like I said, if you plan ahead of time, you don't need to tinker with all this stuff unless it's absolutely necessary, or like say you're in a studio, you're crunching for time, you got to do this quick, you got to make things work and look pretty good. You might mess with these. You might need to optimize some stuff even though you planned ahead and something's not right. You might have to use that. But also, for those of you not aware of this as well, just in case I didn't cover it. So you see how this is on map channel 1? You want to make sure that everything's on map channel 2, okay? And when this menu pops up, let's say you just made the model and you didn't do anything to any of the channels. This won't matter when you first do it, but if, let's say you texture map this, okay, and then you went to 2 and it's asking you about the UVs on map channel 1, you can abandon those because you're trying to move to the clear default map channel 2. If you move it, you're going to be moving those to map channel 2, and then map channel 1 will be reset. Okay, so you know what, if that makes sense. So you got to be careful when this pops up, what's going to happen, and when's a good time to use one or the other. So this does matter. I know a lot of people say it doesn't. It does. So right now, since I've already pretty much done the light mapping on this, and for some reason it was on 1, I'll just move it. Okay, I can texture it later. You can always, you know, put another stack on and fix it. So we'll do that. Go here. Now this is a pretty simple one too, right? It's only two faces, but again, you're going to have to do this every time. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but you know, it's worth it. A lot better than having to go back and fix everything later. That's a bigger pain in the butt. So go down to pixel snapping. Now, again, like I said about the size and utilizing the size uh, on the UV versus the actual model. So these are trying to basically be the same size, which they are. Okay, so you don't really want to warp these unless you're not going to notice too much of a difference of the resolution of the shadow map being baked on. So if you can get away with it, yes, you can move them, but for the most part, I wouldn't, because it will alter the quality of your shadows. So again, let me go down here. This is just a simple wall, you know, anything with edges like this are pretty simple. Go to this one here. Now, because I moved that, everything's snapping in, so then I can bring this down. I'll keep it, you know, and this is what I did for the wall that's already in there, so I know this works. And do that. Now, you probably, like I said, you could probably get away with stretching these a little bit so that they're using a little bit more. You will get a better resolution for utilizing more. But again, if you make them too small and things like that, you'll have issues. So that's pretty much done, right? So we got that all going on here. What was I going to say? There was something else I was trying to make a point on. Trying to think here. All right. Another thing that I would probably you can give it a try, and it may work with certain models that you create. But let's say that you wanted to make sure, because I usually do this piece by piece. The problem with that is it also goes against what I just said. If you don't measure, you know, make these the right size in your UV area, each side's going to have different resolutions, and the shadows might be just a little bit off, like it was in Unreal 4. So another way to kind of avoid that, if you're only doing a modular set that's pretty simple, this is how I get around that. I will take this, highlight all of them, and then unwrap UVW modifier. Okay, open up the UV editor, and it's going to have all of them in here in different areas. Well, what I do, and first, of course, I always do this. All right, flat mapping, because what this is going to do is going to take every face and separate them properly, and that's what you're trying to do with light maps. You don't want to have any UV islands attached to other faces where they'd normally probably be detached, sharp edges and things like that. And so what it's doing is that it's taking all of them into account and trying to keep them all the same size as it would be represented on your model, which is what you want. So, you know, let's say that you're aiming for a 2048 by 2048 light map. Normally you would never do this unless it's very high quality render. But let's say that's what you're aiming for and you're doing this. The problem is you're going to get less than that, at least for the resolution on the shadow map. It won't have any effect on bleeding and stuff like that because you've already snapped everything. But you may want a higher resolution, right? So the best way to kind of keep in mind when doing this is that you may want to make a template that's 4096 by 4096, and then just keep in mind, okay, I'm going to adjust this to maybe 2048 and so forth. And what will happen is that even though that doesn't seem like that makes sense, it does, because you will notice a different resolution right away when you bring it in, when you bake it. You will notice certain parts don't have a good resolution versus others with just a 2048 by 2048 and then doing this. If you do a 4096 and then bog it down, it might be a little bit more crisp. Okay, it's little subtle things like that, but again, it may not have any effect on what you're trying to do, so don't worry too much about it. You'd probably be fine with 1024 by 1024, but again, keep in mind the smaller that these are, the less space it uses up and the more pixelated your shadows are going to be. So that's why I say sometimes it's better to make a bigger shadow light map template and then kind of go backwards, go down. So when I do that, everything snaps right off the bat. Everything, all the sharp edges. Okay, and if for any reason an edge isn't completely snapped in between pixels, which I know a lot of people are probably wondering, well, what do I do if it's curved or it's like this? And that's, don't worry about that. I'm about to show you what you need to know. Hopefully I do this example just right. Let me find a small piece. Well, I guess it's really not going to be too many of those. So here's this. Let me just turn this, right? And then we'll just move it over here just for the sake of seeing it. All right, so let's say you did this, right? And you're trying to get this to work with a straight edge, but you're seeing that it's going through pixels. It's going through this one, and this one. What you kind of want to aim for is, if you can, you want to get this edge to only go to this, to that corner, and through that corner. So then it's really only going through 2 pixels, not 3, because like I said, when it burns the shadow map, it's going to try to fill every pixel it can. So there's a huge pixel here, half there that it's going to try to cover. Okay, because it isn't just not going to cover this one. You're going to just have light there and shadows here. It's not going to look right, which could happen. So what you want to do is you may want to mess with the vertices and make sure they snapped in each corner so that this line goes right through. All right, so again, you may not be able to do that, but as long as you minimize the amount of pixels that your edges are going through, you'll minimize the bleeding. You're not going to have an issue with that. So let's see if I can turn this. Yeah, it's kind of on the snap thing. So yeah, see, okay, here we go. That actually worked. So I have this, all these clicked on here, and it actually affects what's in here. See how it's only going through half of that? So only half a pixel is going to go over and maybe bleed onto something else, but if you keep it spaced enough, it won't bleed. However, it will still use an even amount of the pixel on the side, and that's what a lot of people don't realize, is that the shadows are pixels too, and you want to make sure that you're utilizing them to the best of your ability. It isn't just the space, it's the pixels. So again, with other UVs, you may have to adjust them. You may have to adjust vertices, and that's kind of where it gets, a pain in the butt. If you got to do everything by hand and really get down to it, you don't have a lot of time. That's why they sometimes have to crunch for time. They can't do all this last minute. I would advise doing this first and then worry about texturing and stuff later, but that's just me. And sometimes they have programs like iPack that, which is a program I believe is exclusive for Apple computers. I don't believe PC has a copy of that yet, but there's other programs or plugins, at least for 3ds Max, Maya, stuff like that. They may have something similar where on the side they'd have a menu like this, but it'd have more fields where you'd probably put in padding, light map resolution, and then, or maybe just pixel snapping, which would, if you loaded this in, when it automatically lays this all out, it will snap it to the grid. You know what I mean? Just like I was showing you. And it will cut a lot of corners for you. However, it's not a guarantee it's always going to work. So you got to make sure you know what you're doing. So for more complex models, that would be a great program so that you could lay out your faces. I would do them by hand, put them in here, and then let the program do the rest of the work for you. Just check it, make sure that it's laid out properly, and you should be fine. Now, again, like I said, the guy Warren Marshall on YouTube, he actually uses that program, and obviously has an Apple computer, but he uses other programs like Modo and things like that. But that program, iPack That, is a program I wish I had, because I would really cut the time that it takes to lay out my UVs for a lot of my models. And yeah, so that's just what you want to keep in mind. So if you ever have an edge that doesn't perfectly snap this way, as long as you can get it to go through the middle of a pixel from edge to edge like this, you should be fine. Okay, and if you got any curve edges, again, just try to adjust it so that it's not going through any more pixels than it has to. If you can get it to go through one at a time on the lines, you're good. So we'll just close that. It's not really something we got to worry about right now. And yeah, I believe I already covered these, but like I said, UV channel 0 is actually map channel 1 in 3ds Max or Maya. UV channel 1 is actually map channel 2. So this UV channel 1 is where your light map layouts will be, and the first one will be where the textures are. Now I put the same on both, but normally I would probably change that on the texture map. So, but let me show you some of Epic's meshes, and this way you can kind of see how they did it. Now, some of these meshes they made, they didn't even bother laying out the texture maps. So let's see, maybe. All right, so they got, yeah, see what I mean? See how this is all red? Because it's not laid out properly. which is weird. I don't know how you get the textures on here just right when it's kind of looking like that, but you don't want to do this. This is a no-no, okay? So they must know what they're doing, but this is not what you want to do. You want to make sure that your asset has the textures laid in within this UV space. But I think mainly what they're aiming for is this. Okay, you see how they did this? They would flatten out all their UVs and they would space them. Okay, now depending on the complexity of your model and the size of the UV islands, you may have to space them more than some others. I do notice sometimes, even if you have them evenly spaced, like I said, 2 pixels on the outside, 4 in between them, the islands, it doesn't always work. It's very rare that it doesn't, but it doesn't always work. And as you can see here, there's not a lot of spacing on some of these, but they must have known exactly what they were doing for this model for it to work. So just keep in mind the practices I told you. You should go with that, but if worst case scenario that doesn't work, you may have to adjust things. So that's just that one right there. But let me go to a more simple. Here we go. Yeah, more simple asset. So again, they kind of didn't really texture this right, but then again, if it's a box, it's pretty simple. You know, you may not have to do all the sides. If you just have like top and bottom in the same square as one of these and then have these laid out, you're all right. So they got away with this, but usually you'd probably just want to unfold it anyway. But the second UV channel, as you can see, they're spaced out. You want to make sure, again, the background of this, depending on what resolution they were aiming for, and I'm guessing they weren't really caring too much about that because it's 32. Maybe it's small, so maybe they did snap it, and the pixels are pretty big, so they probably did snap it. But if you're aiming for something bigger, you want to make sure that you snap them and you have enough spacing. This is a lot of space, but that might have been because they needed to do that. So one more here I'm going to do to show you more of a shape here that's pretty detailed. Um, One, again, they didn't really care about the texturing, I guess, because it's just a piece to use as a demo. This, however, is what I mean about certain faces. This is pretty close to that side here. This top space here is this one. Obviously, this here is this one, or it's the back one, maybe. Yeah, it could be the back one. But that's, you know, actually, no, I think they cut that one up. This one, yeah, that would be the front. So you want to keep them as close as possible. And if you can't, okay, but just keep in mind, what you're aiming for with your shadow map resolution. Now, when people ask me, well, what's the difference between light map and shadow map? A shadow map is just like a texture map, okay? So that's all that is. It's just a map of your shadow as it's baked into your level. And that is resulted from your light map. So if your light map is aimed at 1024 by 1024, your shadow map is going to be the same thing. But then again, like I said, with the light map density option in this, depending on how big your faces are, that will change from face to face basis, polygon to polygon basis. So right now this is a little off because I messed with the light mask settings. I'm going to probably bring them back to default and rebake it, but for the most part it's pretty crisp. Another thing you want to keep in mind is that this isn't on by default, and this is. This compresses them and gives you kind of JPEG artifacts, which you don't really want, but that's for the sake of optimization for a large game. So you might want that when your game is getting pretty big, but for the most part, as you can see, the shadows along the corners and stuff are baked in right. They're going across the faces properly. There's no bleeding. It's detecting the corners of like the doorway and stuff to shadows on my asset onto theirs looks pretty good and sharp. You could always change settings to fix that. Another thing, light mask portals is very good to use for interiors because the light mask swarm agent doesn't always get in there properly. And this here, the environment color is default black. I turned it to white so that it's a lot more brighter, especially in the corners and the shadows here. You'll be able to see it. So for instance, when I do this, right, see how it doesn't change much when I'm outside? And usually if you didn't use these and didn't do that, it would be dark inside, and then when you go in it would lighten up. And you could test that on your own version Unreal and see how that works. But that's how I fix that. So this way, it's a good transition from one area to the next. Okay. Um, so that's pretty much it. I mean, that's what you just need to know to build your models. Plan ahead, and just keep in mind that shadow maps resulting from your light map bakes are pixels too. And if you keep them in a way where they're utilizing the pixels to the best of their ability and they're snapped in, you will have perfect shadows every time and you won't have issues. Again, no overlapping UVs because you'll have bleeding. You don't want to do that. It's not like texture mapping, and you want to make sure you have enough spacing in between your islands as well as the edges of the UV space. So hopefully this has helped you learn some more. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me in the comment section. And yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Thanks for watching.